You could be intentional on tying your fund to the creation of positive impact outcomes, but also what's important, very briefly, to the differentiation between ESG investing, because it's so essential. So it's indeed basically where ESG ends. I think this is very nicely said. But what I would also like to flag, even though I'm on the deep side of impact, right? And I think we definitely need impact in order to really solve those root causes and to have those transformative solutions out there. But smaller funds like us, for example, we are backed by private investors. And the cool thing about it is these are usually very like-minded investors. In our case, absolutely like-minded investors who really want to be intentional. And I think as a, let's say, smaller fund, you definitely have to bring a dedicated USP to the, let's say, syndicates table, to the funding round. And their smaller impact funds usually have to bring a very strong impact value creation package to the table. So in our case, our USP is really exactly this impact value creation package that we bring to the table to the companies where we are investing in.
Mm-hmm. So impact is a very broad term, yeah? How do you actually go about comparing impact? So how do you value social impact, for example, versus climate impact? So the example somebody's written for me here is like not building a new power plant might be better for the climate, but worse for the local community. I mean, that's probably a very simplistic example, but one that maybe ordinary people can understand. How do you compare impact across different areas?
Who is the question addressed next to me?
Yes, to you actually, yeah.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Yes. I think actually in your timeline until 2030. So the question I think is not so much is whatever like the social side more relevant or the environmental side, because when we look at the burning issues, our fund is called Burning Issues Impact Fund. So when we look at the burning issues, so they are both on the social as well as on the environmental side, related to the SDGs. So I think that example that you gave, dear Nick, is a very good one. And I think when we talk, and in this session we talk about intention and impact, then it's really, we need to ask ourselves when we are true impact investors, are there no unintended negative side effects involved with basically an impact investment? So if you like, for example, to invest in a wind farm, right? But if deforestation has to go on, or if local, people of whatever the Sami tribe, which is actually happening in real life, have to be relocated in order that this wind farm can be built, then from an impact investor's perspective, there's a negative side effect. And this definitely will not be an impact investment from the very beginning, meaning that as an impact investor, you have to go very deep in the due diligence and also actually check in this social and environmental due diligence if there is no unintended negative side effect when you deploy the capital for the first time. This is very important when you really want to achieve systemic change.
Yeah. Cara, just a very brief answer to one question, Cara. I mean, in a sense, some of these things that you're having to make decisions about as investors are also things that actually governments have to make some decisions about. Be good for the climate, but might have some impact locally, say on a community. Does Mercer ever talk with governments on this? I mean, in terms of decisions you take, or does it shape decisions, or does the climate, the political climate shape decisions? Just briefly.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And, you know, the impact in general is three-pronged, right? I mean, you need government involvement, you need investors to the private sector, and you also even need you need communities to be involved. So there is government engagement. You've got conferences like the COP that take place, which is very much about bringing together the private sector with government sector to have these conversations, because you're right, there are these trade-offs, and unfortunately trade-offs have to be made. There's almost no investment that is pure, clean, and easy to make, and there is, unfortunately, one thing usually does have to give in way of another. Hopefully at some point that's not the case, but yeah, so absolutely long-winded way of saying absolutely we are involved in speaking with governments in some of the decisions. We certainly work with a lot of government asset owners as they're making their own decisions, and are usually they have a lot of increased scrutiny on the way that they're investing and allocating.
Right, thank you. Pia, let's turn to you. Trill Impact Ventures. So impact investing is all about creating positive returns and positive impact. Again, it's coming back to this tricky question. How do you balance those two things?
Yes, that's a good question. And in order to balance, I would actually said that impact investing is about acceleration. So we find companies where we can accelerate impact, and by accelerating impact, we also accelerate the financials, the financial returns. And to the discussion earlier around like, where do you find those companies? Where do you find the companies that are making impact? And we are actually using the 17 SDG goals, and they are so cleverly defined with all the specific comes a gap. There is also regulations coming, or there is a financial purpose to actually invest. Mm-hmm. So using that as a guidance, we see the linkage between impact and financial acceleration. And just to give a couple of examples of where you actually can invest, where this goes very well together. So anything of energy efficiency, like building automation, for example, like selling more energy reduction to your property owners, you actually avoid CO2 emission. Or we have, for example, a company in agriculture irrigation, which actually help reduce water usage on the field and also energy use, and at the same time increase the crop. Mm-hmm. So, and you can also have other examples on the social side, like educational companies or e-health companies, where selling more actually contribute to the society. And that is to what we discussed earlier. This is really like our impact thesis of every single investment. Like, how can we measure the impact along with the financial return in each specific? Where is the baseline? What is the target in 5 years? How do we get there? And then we model that actually together with a financial plans. And that is very separate for us versus ESG matters, which is really responsible operations, hygiene factors. How do you treat your employees? How do you deal with your own supply chain? And how do you act in an ethical manner towards your suppliers?
Let me come back to you again, Pia. One of your investment focus areas is microfinance.
Yes.
I'm thinking Schumacher University, actually. Which might not be something people traditionally think about when they think of VCs, venture capitals. How are you working with microfinancing, and how is that part of impact investing?
Yeah, so True Impact was founded by a very visionary man with a private equity industrial background, Jan Ståhlberg, and from the very beginning, the idea was really to create an impact house. So whatever we do and whoever we recruit is actually people that has a passion for impact in different shapes and forms. And we started out with a it's called buyout strategy, investing in majorities, and then we actually found a really good person in the microfinance space, and also a couple of other persons in the venture space where we invest in more of startups. But into your question on the microfinance side, there we do impact at scale. We have a person and we also have a partnership which actually reach out to 5.5 million entrepreneurs around the world, where we can provide microloans and make a real difference on the ground. It's a different business model, but we also have a different team working on that. So the platform of doing impact and thinking impact is in the culture of us as a firm, but of course we need to tailor the business model to each one. But seeing those entrepreneurs really like comfortable for us as a firm.
Yes. Maybe something to everybody. I mean, is it still true that it's far easier to do impact investing in the so-called rich developed countries versus the developing countries? Is impact investment predominantly happening in the developed countries rather than developing countries? Cara, maybe you could kick off.
I don't know if we'd go with far easier. I think there are numerous challenges around impact investment, and that's why you do need to rely on the likes of professionals like we have on this panel, right? That actually can access and have the information. The training is that there are equal opportunities globally, but there may be a tendency to lean towards more developed markets. But I hand it over to the PMs.
Kristen, where are your impacts happening, in developing countries, or are they mainly in the more developed countries?
Mm-hmm. We're actually only investing in Europe, so in developed countries, basically. But when you again, and I'm citing again the SDGs, when you look at the SDGs, we need also their both, right? It's a no-brainer. We need impact investments in emerging markets, developing countries. But we also need transformation here on the ground in developed markets because we have massive challenges to solve, right? And I think traditionally impact investing has actually been kicked off in developing countries, like with microfinance, which is like the oldest approach. But now we also see more and more, in particular in the climate space, but also on the social side, more and more funds coming up, VC funds, in developed markets. And I think the good news is we need them both because, we need to solve the challenges basically across the planet urgently.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Well, I think that since we are, since the impact with intent, the investment with intent and the impact is fairly new, and we have a lot of challenges to solve, you need to have very, very low political risk, transparency and governance in place. That's and the need. So and the potential to solve it, to create a solution, and that's why we start with the developed market. Any impact investing in the emerging market directly is classified as opportunistic and higher risk because of political risk and because of maybe less transparency. But I always see that what we do in developed market is the starting point, and soon we will export actually a lot of ideas in place to the emerging market, and this is where the need is for people and the planet to really create difference in their life. And I am coming from an emerging market, and I see the need every time I visit my family. So you are right, but I hopefully will soon see that in emerging market fund and impact fund.
We've just got 1 minute. Pia, I'm going to just flip this question. I was going to ask Cara as